There, and welcome to this session, Solving Tactics on chesstempo.com with the Advocate. Today we're doing 1700 to 1800 mixed problems, 1700 to 1800, so this video is going to be useful to you if you're around 1600, maybe up to 1900. And mixed, which means that we get the regular problems, gaining material, but we also get defensive problems, which preserve material that we've gained, or find perpetual, or find some sort of repetition in a lost position. A quick notice on how to use these videos. You've listened to this first 15 seconds so far, so you know I've got a shitty fucking mic. So don't actually listen to me talking to my shitty mic in a monotone for like the next 30 or 40 minutes. No, every time you see a new tactic, pause the video, try to solve it yourself. And if you can solve it yourself, skip ahead to where I finally do the reveal of whatever the answer is to the problem. Usually takes me like 3 or 4 minutes per problem. And if you're having difficulty solving the problem, then start to listen to me solve it. Because otherwise you're not getting the maximum profit from the video. So pause, try to solve it. If you get lost, go ahead and listen. But if you don't, skip ahead and check the lines. Let's go ahead and get started. White's threatening to win a pawn. Trying to find something against the king. For example, Queen G3 hitting the rook. Queen G3 hitting the rook. Let's say rook F1, and then I would have knight takes E2. If bishop takes E2, queen takes C3. So queen G3, if knight F3, knight takes F3, queen G3, if knight takes D4, I'm going to take on F2. Knight takes E7, pawn takes E7. Safe. Queen G3. What about Queen H4 instead of Queen G3? Well, then I wouldn't have this pin. What about Queen E? Queen E3 instead of Queen G3. What's the difference there? Queen E3, Rook F3 takes. So I don't see much of a difference between Queen E3 and Queen F3. Or Queen G3 rather. What's the difference between Queen E3 and Queen G3? There has to be a difference, I feel. Maybe just Queen E3 doesn't come with as much force because Queen G3 I also have bishop takes H3 threats. So queen here. And how does he react? Rook f3, I take it. So he needs to somehow defend the rook. Rook f5. Wait, queen g3 is not a move. Queen g3 is not a move. Knight takes queen. So yeah, queen e3 is the only move. Queen e3. Rook f6. Knight takes e2. Queen here. So he needs to somehow defend this rook. Let's say king g1. Queen here, king g1. Knight takes. And the bishop can't take because of the pin. Knight takes check. So yeah. Do I take first, actually? That's something to consider, isn't it? I could take and then take here. Takes. What's he gonna do? He has no way to defend this. So take rook f3, take here, rook takes e3, rook takes d2, and I'm up a piece. So yeah, I should recapture first. Then if knight takes f1, if knight f1, so pawn takes here, knight f1. Okay, I think the problem with this is knight f1. If pawn takes knight f1, and if queen f2 trying to get clever, there's queen c2. But after queen c2, there's queen f4. Pawn takes knight f1. Queen takes. If rook takes, pawn takes queen. And I'm up a rook. If queen c1, queen f4. And I'm up a rook. Queen takes f1, f2, knight check, king g7. Yep. And with this knight check, just queen f4. That's fine. This knight check, queen here. Next problem. Threatening mate on h2. Is there any direct way to stop checkmate on h2? Queen check. Queen check. King f2. Queen takes f2. Checkmate is the threat. So I could play queen. I could play queen e2. Queen e2. Queen check. King f1. Queen check is mates. So rook d2. So not queen e2. I could play queen a7. Queen a7, queen check, king f1, queen h1 check, king f2, king e2. And that seems to hold. Queen a7. I also play bishop e1. Bishop e1. Bishop e1. Queen takes check. King f1. Queen h1 check. King here. That's fine. So Queen a7 and Bishop e1 both seem to do the job. Queen takes and rook takes doesn't work. There's no check. No check. So which one do I want? Queen a7 or Bishop e1? Queen a7, and I should win a piece, right? Queen a7, rook d8. Queen e7, queen check, king f1, queen check, king e1. And he has no more checks. So now my king's on e2. The queen's on h1. And he needs to do something about this bishop. So if bishop c7, I can take on... Actually, you know what? If bishop c7, I can take on b8, can't I? Bishop takes b8, rook d8, checkmate. So yeah, I think queen a7. Nope, rook d2. Wonder what's wrong with queen a7. Queen a7, queen takes h2 check, king f1, queen h1 check. Oh, and then queen takes here. Ah, I couldn't see it. I didn't see it. I didn't see that I was losing the rook at the end of the line. Yeah, that wasn't even on my radar. Yeah, and that if I had seen that, it would have been an easy move to find. Damn. Oh, knight takes, rook takes, queen takes. If I had this knight were not here, I could play rook a1. But then he would just play rook b8. Rook b1 rather. If I change the order, if I bring this rook in here, if I play knight takes, rook takes, rook a2. Rook b2, rook takes check, queen takes, rook takes b2. Knight takes, rook takes. Knight takes, rook a2, rook a8, a2. Let's say knight c2. do it immediately. He's got queen takes c2, which I don't like, because I don't have any sort of follow-up. So I think that knight takes is the first move. Knight takes, rook a2, knight c2. Gives me problems though. Knight c2, rook takes, queen here. Threatening c2, threatening b4. And he doesn't have a defense, huh? Knight takes, rook takes, rook takes. Rook a2, knight c2. Rook a takes d1, queen takes d1. And then queen c3. Hitting the knight on c2 and hitting the knight on b4. And he has no way to cover both of them. Does it matter how I take? Might as well take with the queen, right? Why does the problem continue? I can take with the rook and then pick up the d pawn. But I could also just take with the queen and be a healthy piece up. I think I prefer to just be the piece up. Okay. Yeah, there's no question that this is more winning, but it's just easier to win, I feel, without any chances of this queen entering the... I mean, there are no chances of the queen entering the position here. I'm threatening rook d2. But I don't know. It seems... Okay. Mistakes made in this position. Knight takes d5. Most common mistake. Knight takes d5. Knight takes d5. Threatening rook a2. But yeah, it's not an immediate win of... It wins a pawn. But now rook b2 will stop rook a2. Queen check. No. Rook takes. Queen takes check. King c7. So rook takes. Queen takes. King c7. Queen takes c4 check is probably not great for me. The immediate king c7, rook takes d8, king takes d8, queen takes g5, f5 rather. What about knight f8? Rook takes f8, queen d2 check, king b1, queen d1. Knight f8, rook takes f8, rook takes f8, covering f5, queen takes f5, queen takes e5. Knight takes queen check, there isn't. Knight takes queen check, rook takes, or knight takes. Probably knight takes. So knight f8, knight f8, queen h6. Knight takes h6, doesn't have the h6 square. b3. b3, pawn takes b3. Take en passant. This is a move that I did not consider. Take en passant. And then queen takes f5 should be the biggest test. Takes here, queen takes f5. Queen d2 check, king b1. Rook c8. Doesn't work because it's already covered. So takes en passant. Queen takes f5. Queen d2 check. King b2. Pawn takes c2. Queen takes c2. Some way to pick up this rook maybe. Pawn takes. Pawn takes, queen takes. Queen takes c. Or pawn takes c rather. Maybe b2 check, king takes b2. King takes b2, queen check. King c1. C takes b3. C takes b3. Queen takes f5. Okay, yeah, this is much better. I didn't see it. I didn't calculate this. I didn't even see it. Wasn't even a candidate move that I considered. That's fucking stupid. Yeah, this is much better than anything that I was considering. So knight f3, pawn takes, queen takes, check. This way there isn't a rook b8 checkmate. If you take the queen right away, there's rook b8 mate. I wasn't going to go through that one bit by bit because I'm a little bit upset that I lost the last two problems. Threatening checkmate on g2. Knight f6 check, king h8, queen takes f8. Checkmate. So knight h6 check, king g7, forced. Queen takes f8, check. King takes f8, knight takes h7, check. So the critical line is actually going to be knight f6 check, king g7, queen f8 check, king takes f6, queen e7 check, king g7, queen takes g5. And the critical line is queen takes, king takes, and you have to see queen e7. "41 wrong moves here." Ooh, Levon Aronian with the white pieces. The most common mistake is knight e7 check. Knight e7 check, king h8, queen check, f6. All right. f4, f5. The theme is going to be hold the draw, I guess. Or win. King h4. Now the thing is I can never step to the g file, right? But I can play f4, f5. f5, rook f8, rook takes a7, rook takes f5 check, king g6, rook takes e5, rook d6. Rook takes e3, rook takes here, king e2, king f6, king h5, king g6, repetition. f5, d6, f4, d7, f3, d8 queens, e2 check, king f2, wait, no, rook a1 checkmate, f5, d6, f4, d7, f3, and if d8 queens, rook a1 checkmate. So instead, f3, rook f8, rook takes a7, d8 queens, d1 mate. So f5, d6, f4, d7, f3, rook f8, rook takes a7. If d8 queens, rook takes a1, rook takes f3, rook takes d7. Lokvanveli with the black pieces. The critical lines are f8, rook takes, rook check. This will lead to a repetition. King g, king f, king here. King e2, for example, king f5, rook takes here. Now, king g6, repetition. White has nothing better than this, if he wants to continue the game. The other critical line is, instead of trying to queen the a pawn, you try to queen the d pawn. Now I'm threatening rook a1 checkmate, so d8 queens is too slow. So the critical line is probably rook f3 or rook e8 after rook a7. You still can't promote because of rook a1 checkmates, so you must take, 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 and rook g7 should secure the draw. Oh, excuse me. 1 second. Alright. Just took a little break to blow my nose and heat up my pot of coffee. So in this position, bishop takes d7 is on, rook takes d7 is on. If I play rook takes d1, then I'll have to contend with rook d8 next move. So this looks like a Caro-Kann actually. If f5, rook takes d7, queen takes d7, queen takes e5, I don't like. Rook takes d1, rook takes d1. Yeah, so you definitely can't play f5, right? Because if f5, rook takes d1, queen takes d1, queen takes e5, check, wins the rook. Well, wait, no. Yeah, queen takes e5, queen takes check, bishop d6, queen takes h8. So you can't play that. So So I think you're forced to play rook takes d1. Rook takes d1 seems pretty forced. If the rook goes to any other square, rook d8, no. Rook d6, bishop b4. So yeah, rook takes d1 is the only move. So rook takes d1, rook e takes d1, then what? Maybe bishop g7? Bishop g7 to stop bishop d8 or rook takes d or rook d8. Both of those seem like reasonable continuations. Okay, so now I need to stop rook d8 or bishop d8. I'm guessing is the point here. So bishop g7 was my continuation. Honestly, I didn't think the problem would continue, but I see now that bishop g7 doesn't stop rook d7. So rook d7. So if bishop g7, rook d7, I lose the bishop. Or no, I mean there's queen f8. Bishop g7, rook d7. Queen f8. Queen f8. Rook d8. Queen back to e7. It's fine for me. So bishop g7, rook d7. I think the real test is going to be rook takes b7. Rook takes b7. King takes b7. Knight check. King b8. Knight check. King a8. So just going to a8 right away is probably better. Bishop g7. Rook. Queen. Rook takes. King takes. Knight check. King a8. And I seem to be holding on. f5. Because queen takes f5 is no longer an issue. e5 is no longer an issue. Okay. All right. Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. And then this gives me time to play bishop g7. I saw this, but I didn't. I saw this like in like my initial analysis, but for some reason I didn't stick with it. I think actually like oftentimes the whole like talking over and calculating every line is actually like hurting me a little bit. It's definitely hurting my rating. White to move. Equality at the moment. 2, 4. I'm a pawn up. Rook takes, bishop takes. Rook takes here. Rook takes here. Bishop check. King e6, bishop takes check. Rook c7, and I'm up a piece. Bishop takes, rook f7 check. King d8, rook f8 check, and I'm up a piece. Just do a couple more. Pawn takes, bishop takes. Bishop takes, bishop takes. Pawn takes. Rook takes, doesn't seem to lead anywhere. Rook h7, or rather rook h8. King d6, doesn't seem to help. Rook takes b7. Rook takes b7. c6, rook c7. King d4. King d6. c4. Rook takes. Bishop takes. King takes. Equality. Takes, bishop takes, rook takes b6. One way to go about it. Bishop takes e4, king takes e4. Rook c4 check, So I need to play e4. After which rook b3 check, or rook c3 check, king d4, rook g3 should be enough to secure a draw. Is there no way to deflect this? The key to an endgame advantage would be c6, bishop takes, rook takes here. Bishop takes. King takes. Rook c4 check. King f5. And if rook takes a4, rook takes f6. But unfortunately, that's not going to be winning. Is it? Is that winning? Pawn takes, bishop takes. Bishop takes here. Or rook takes here. If bishop takes, king takes, rook c4 check. King f5, rook takes a4, rook takes f6. No, that's definitely not winning because of rook f4 check. Rook f4 check, king g6, rook takes f6 check. I'm lost. But I can play the Zwischenschach. Rook e6 check, and if king f7, rook takes check. And if rook d7, rook check here, or rook takes here. And now rook f4 check doesn't work. If rook f4 check, king takes g5, and I'm covering my f3 pawn. But unfortunately, that's just... I mean, you can also play pawn takes, bishop takes, rook takes b6, and you can just play bishop takes a4. That's certainly not winning. Okay, so this pawn is pinned. Is there anything I can do with that? What about a5? a5, b takes a5, b6. Rook d7, bishop f5. No more defenders. b5, c5, bishop takes b7, or rook takes b7. a5, and after everything there's either a6 or b5. Good one. Vladimir Sergeyev, playing black. Kenkin, or is it Khankin? Igor. I'm not certain about Russian pronunciation. I think it's Khankin. B takes c6, most common mistake. Yep, so this is the line that I saw. B takes c6, bishop takes, rook takes. Go away, go away. Bishop takes, rook c4 check, king here. And now if rook takes here, rook check, king d7 takes. However, that's not forced. There's rook check, rook check, king g, and then rook takes. No. This is fine. Rook takes. This line is actually pretty good for white. But the actual problem with the c takes line, c takes, bishop takes, rook takes, and then bishop takes a4. And that's the problem with this line. Rook check, for example. Oh. If rook b7 and the rooks come off, there's not much left to play for. So yeah, I ultimately had to dismiss this line. I had considered a5 previously, but for some reason it didn't really click for me. White to move. I can take that. Queen takes, queen check, king g7, and if queen takes e7, checkmate. Wait, that's not the line. Queen takes g8, a8 queens, king g7. Wait a second, what about king takes g8, a8 queens, rook e8, queen takes e8, king g7. Now if queen takes f7, king takes f7, queen c4 check, king g7, queen takes e4. That's still perpetual, huh? So I might as well just, or that's still a draw, so I might as well just play king h7 and just have a simpler draw. Queen takes g8, a8 queens, king g7, queen e4. No checkmate. But then what about knight e2? No, knight e2, the queen covers, the two queens cover the e2 square. So queen takes queen a8. If king g7, I'm losing. King h7, still losing. So queen takes, queen check. King takes, queen check, king e8, queen takes, king g7. Oh, and then he'll have queen check here as well. And then queen, wait. So then I should play king h7. But then f7 check and queen c8 mate. So no. Just repeat. So there were a couple of lines. The first line that I saw was, or the major line, the main line I would say, is king g8, a8 queens, and if king g7, queen takes e4 covering the checkmate, and if rook e8 trying to stop it, there's queen check, king g7, queen check, king, I don't know, h7, queen takes covering the checkmates, and if you try to get clever, trying to stop this check, there's queen check, king h8, queen c8, checkmate. So the best is just to allow the perpetual. Let's just do one more. Might have said that last time, but I'm really horrible at keeping track. A4. A4, bishop D. Not certain what that gains me. There's no current threat, really. Knight h4 doesn't really work. Or knight g4. Knight g4, pawn takes. Nothing. No follow-up. Bishop h2 check. Doesn't work. E5, queen takes f6. Huh. I have difficulties understanding what the threat is or the tact, like what the idea behind the position is. Does a4 liberate my pieces somehow? a4 to get the bishop off of this diagonal in order to go to d5. d5, knight d5 doesn't seem like some amazing thing. If I play a nothing move, is like g4, g5 a threat? g4, no, not really. I'll always have the h5 square for the knight. I mean, let's say g4, a4, g5, pawn takes, pawn takes, pawn, or rather pawn takes, pawn takes, pawn takes, queen takes f6. And then bishop h6 is coming. But I can just play bishop f8, stopping all threats. So that doesn't seem scary. Like, if I played a nothing move like rook c7, g4, threatening g5, I can play a4, g5, or a4, g5, a takes b, g takes f, f takes, queen takes, then queen f8. And I'm safe. Or no, in that position I wouldn't be able to do it, because my rook on d8 would be unprotected. But there are other ways to work it. So I'm not able to arrive at the correct idea in this position. This knight is pinned to the f7 square, but he can't really be moved at the moment except via g4, g5. I mean, this bishop hitting f7 is really the only thing he has going for him in the position, so I feel like a4 is just the move, even though I can't find any real concrete threats. But a4 displacing the bishop and disconnecting the rooks seems to be the move. The problem continues. I don't get it. There's no like deadly threat like here. Oh, bishop h2, king takes, and then queen takes f2. Okay. So disconnect the rooks and then win the exchange. That took forever to see. With the idea of bishop d6 or queen d6, as well as knight c3. That took a really long time to see, but it's very like arcane, very arcane, and it's also like very questionable how much compensation you have here. But I suppose with the isolated pawn and control over the c-file, you're doing a pretty good job of winning so far. So this will be very convertible. Okay, let's call that the last one. That was a problem that I sort of felt my way through, which I am very dissatisfied with. But I was very unclear as to what the winning plan was, and I wasn't certain if it was a defensive problem where I was just trying to stop the attack on f7, or if there was just some clear win of material. To be fair, though, I did talk about disconnecting the rooks there as one of the perks of playing a4, and disconnecting the rooks is the point of the tactical problem, so I can justify it in my own brain. Okay, thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned as much as I did. I hope that you were able to pause the video to learn from it, sort of process all that information. But if you didn't, there will be more videos to come. Maybe you just want to watch some videos in order to practice and then build up those tactical muscles. That's totally fine as well. So thank you so much for watching, and until the next time, good luck with your chess journey. Bye-bye for now.